Hello, my name is Carl Brown, and I'm one of the ministers at North Highlands Baptist Church. And welcome to my home. We're here tonight for another Backyard Bible Study. So glad that you could join us. Why don't you find a nice place where you can listen, maybe get out pencil and paper where you can take notes, and let's get into the Word. Last week, we covered the first 5 chapters of Joshua, and now Joshua is in charge of the Israelites, and they're ready to enter the Promised Land, or they have entered the Promised Land. They crossed the Jordan River, and God split it just like He did the Red Sea miraculously. They actually spied out Jericho, the first great city that was there, a fortified fort, and met Rahab, and now they've had Passover, and the manna has stopped. They've eaten of the new land. The promise has been fulfilled, and now they're ready to conquer the promised land with the Lord's help. And as part of that, the last thing we talked about was a Christophany, was when Joshua actually got the opportunity to meet Jesus in the Old Testament. There are a couple of reasons we know that this is an instance where God appears in the Old Testament. One is because he says He's not on their side and He's not on Jericho's side, that He is the leader of the army of the Lord, which is the Lord of hosts. And that title goes to God and Jesus alone. And so the other reason is because He said you need to take your shoes off, because where you're standing is holy ground, just like He said with Moses. And then Joshua worshiped Him, and he received that worship. Those are 3 reasons we know that it was what I believe is Christophany, Christ in the Old Testament. We're in the middle of this Christophany when the Lord gives Joshua instructions on what He wants to happen to Jericho. Now let's read verse 1 of chapter 6. It says, "Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in." So, like in Star Trek or other references, they were at red alert. They knew that the Israelites had come and that they were coming to conquer, and there was a massive army, and so they had brought everyone that they could get into Jericho, and they had closed the gate. And Jericho itself, the city itself, but was a fort, and it had a wall that went all the way around Jericho. And how big was the wall? Well, archaeologists think they found Jericho, the city now, and according to their digs, they think the wall was around 17 feet tall. I'm not sure that's as tall as it was. I think it may have been taller than that, because we know from our story last week that Rahab let them down with a rope outside the wall, and she had a window in the wall. And it seems to me any kind of window in the first 20 feet would seem a weakness. And so I think the wall was probably more than 20 feet tall. They say it was probably more than 2 to 3 meters thick. And it had to be big enough for her to have to use a rope and have a window that she let the spies out. So that's how big the wall is. It's an enormous wall. It's a fort. It's like a castle, and they're ready to take it on. So that's Jericho. Verse 2. "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. And on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear the sound of a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in.'" All right, so the Lord actually gives him specific battle plans. And it had to sound absolutely crazy, because once again, this is their first real battle in Canaan, and the Lord is going to take credit for this victory, and He's going to do it in a miraculous way. They're pretty used to God working in miraculous ways right now. They've just come fresh out of crossing the Jordan, And so they know the Lord's on their side. They believe in Joshua. He doesn't have any problem at all implementing this plan. And so the children of Israel literally get up every day and they walk all the way around Jericho. I don't know how long that is. It may be 5 miles around. It may be 6. It may be 20. I don't know. My guess is that it's about 4 miles to go around the city of Jericho. And they did that one day, and then they did it the second day, and they did it the third day, and they just kept doing it. Now, Jericho's on edge. I mean, they are on edge, and they're expecting attack at any minute. Now, everybody is standing up on the top of this wall, watching them go around and around. On the first day, they don't know what to expect. They're scared to death. They've got every man up there, I bet. Got everybody primed, everyone ready for an attack, and it doesn't come. Like, oh man, what are they doing? And then the second day, they do it again. What is this? I mean, and so they didn't attack in the day. Well, maybe they're going to attack at night. So maybe they stayed up all night, making sure that everybody's taking turns. Everybody's nervous. Well, that kind of nervous energy for day after day after day will wear you out. And I'm sure it was wearing out the people from Jericho. And I imagine they even thought that the Israelites were a little bit crazy. And I had someone suggest to me the other day, and I just thought it was a funny thought. They're like, those Israelites have no sense of direction. I mean, they left Egypt, should have been here in 2 weeks, but it took them 40 years to get here. Maybe they can't even find the front door of Jericho. I don't know. I just thought that was funny. Anyway, they do it for 6 days. And by the end of 6 days, you know how people are. Went from being nervous to being scared to being antsy to being tired. And you just can't keep it up. That adrenaline goes. And so after 6 days, not only do I think they were exhausted, I think they were just like, yeah, they're doing what they're doing. They do what they do. But that last day, they got up at sunrise. And this one I think is about 4 miles around. They got up early at sunrise and marched around the city 7 times. So 4 times 7 is 28. And so I think that's about as far as you could go in a day with people. And so they were going. So it was 4 or less miles is my guess with them marching around. And and when they finished that last time around with all these men and all these soldiers, they blew the trumpets. They were just blowing it the whole time. I wonder if they had some kind of tune they were playing when they blew it when they were walking around. I mean, by the 7th day, if you're playing the horn, you're going to try to make up a tune. So on the 7th day, they go around 7 times and they're blowing their horn, and they got the ark following them, and then they got the whole army. And then when they do a loud, long blast on the horn, all the people shout. Not only do I think that scared the people in Jericho to death, it was also exactly when God made the walls come crumbling down. And let's look at that. Verse 20. When the trumpet sounded and the people shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So every man charged straight in, and they took the city. Now that's an amazing thing too. Every man, the Lord told them to go straight in. Now they could have went straight in through the gate, but instead they told every man to go straight in. Now if it's 4 miles around, if you take this many fighting men and you spread them out into a marching group, I don't know how long it would take before you finally got all of them. But my guess is it would take more than a mile, a couple of miles. It may take the entire 4 miles. And so they're spread out. And when they yell and the walls come down, they come straight in. The people in Jericho are fully surrounded. There's no avenue of escape. When the walls come down, they come straight in from all sides. And so it was a great battle plan if you have the Lord on your side taking down the wall. I think it's really clever. Now the Lord had given them special instructions on when they took this city. He said that this this city and everything in it was to be devoted to the Lord. Let's read about that. Halfway through verse 16, Joshua says, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord." And he says, "Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make it the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go at his treasury." So Joshua told the people that this first city, sort of like a tithe and offering a sacrifice, this first city that they're taking on, everything is devoted to the Lord. No one's going to get richer and have profit from this particular conquest. That all the gold, all the silver, all the articles that are valuable are going to be donated or devoted to the Lord, and none of the people are to be spared. They're all to be slain, except Rahab and her family, because of her faith in the Lord and because of their promise to her. And that's exactly what happened. Look in verse 24. "Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day." So Rahab the prostitute, that's quite a moniker to have to your name. Rahab the prostitute was saved, and then she was accepted and became part of the family of the Israelites. She adopted their God, adopted their faith, and was adopted into the family. And that's a beautiful thing, and we'll come back and talk about that later. All right, so they had this great victory. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. The walls came tumbling down. They had this incredible victory. They wiped out Jericho, probably one of the greatest cities in all of the land of Canaan. It was their first stop, and God helped them, and miraculously they did all that. And so you're thinking, man, they are on high. They got it going. They got God on their side. Everything's going to be fantastic here on out. I'm sure they're excited. They got confidence. And then chapter 7 happens. But, it's a terrible way to start a chapter. But the Israelites acted unfaithfully in regard to the devoted things. Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of all these people, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. So Achan, of the tribe of Judah, one of the warriors, had taken some of the stuff that they were going to devote to the Lord, and had kept it. Even though Joshua had said very specifically that if you take it, you will bring your own destruction and make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. He had warned everybody, if you take something from this, it's going to be bad for you, it's going to be bad for Israel. But what did Achan do? He took something and he kept it. And it affects all the people. They come against this city called Ai. It's spelled A-I. So I pronounce it Ai. I kind of want to go I, but it's Ai, I think. That's what I'm going to call it, Ai. And it's a smaller town. It's not like Jericho. It's a small town. And but it's got some fierce people in it, but they don't think it's that many people, so they don't take the whole army. They just take a few. Let's just take about 3,000 guys this time. And that's exactly what they did. Verse 4 says, "So about 3,000 men went up, but they were surrounded by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them, and chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries, and struck them down on the slopes. At this the hearts of the people melted, and they became like water." Oh my goodness, what has happened? Here we are, this great country, this great people, this great army, and we've just taken down some of the greatest cities, and now this little town is making our guys run from them like they're scared, yelling "Aye!" and killing them on the slopes. And what has happened? What is wrong? Well, the Lord tells them in chapter 7. The Lord tells them, you've got sin in your camp. Somebody took and kept some of the devoted items, and just like you said, they've brought destruction on Israel. They've done this to you, and now they're bringing destruction on their own head and their own family. There's sin in the camp. So Joshua tells all the people in verses 10 through 16 to consecrate yourselves, because tomorrow we're going to get to the bottom of this. Everybody consecrate yourselves again. Separate yourselves. Pray to the Lord. Spiritually get ready for tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to get to the bottom of this. The next day, they have all the people pass in front of them, and they actually cast lots, trusting the Lord to bring the right person. And they separated which tribe, then they separated which families, then which specific family, then had the men of that family come forward, and it landed on Achan. Verse 19, it says, Then Joshua said to Achan, My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and give him the praise. Tell me what you have done. Do I not hide it from me? Achan replied, It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. Joshua says to them, Why have you brought this on yourself? Why have you brought this on Israel? Now you've brought trouble on Israel. Now you've brought trouble on yourself. And they brought Achan and his family and all the animals he owned and all his possessions, and they put it in front of all the people, and all the people together stoned them until they were all dead, and then they burned them all, and then they piled up a pile of stones on top of them. So it was a really severe judgment on Achan that affected, his sin had affected the entire company of Israel, but his punishment affected his entire family, all of them. They were all slain at that moment. And moving forward from that, the people of Israel were really sober about the fact that God was serious when he said, do it this way. If I'm going to be on your side and help you to these great extents with these great and powerful miracles, then your part is to do it exactly as I say. And if you don't do it exactly as I say, there will be hell to pay. There will be a punishment that you have to pay that's terrible. And so it was very important for the people of Israel to realize this right away, getting into Canaan, that stay on the Lord's side. So what did we learn from Ai and from Achan? We learned that your sin will be found out. That even if you think that you're able to keep it from your family, from your friends, from your bosses, from any other kind of relationship, from the police, well, whatever it is that you're doing, God knows. God knows. And we need to be sober-minded in the fact that a judgment is coming for our sin. God takes sin very seriously. He is a holy God and will not abide by sin being in his camp. And so whether he judges you now or he judges you later, you will be judged for your sin. And it will affect not just you. Your sin does not affect just you. Your business is not just your business. Achan probably thought this was all, it's nobody's business what I do. Your business is not just your business. What you do affects every relationship you have in your life. Your sin affects every single relationship in your life, and in effect, all those people in your realm of influence. Do not be fooled into thinking that your sin is your own business, and so it shouldn't matter to anybody else. That's just not reality. All right, so the people were able to separate the sin and get rid of the sin in the camp. And that brings us to chapter 8. And I'm just going to tell you what happens in chapter 8. Chapter 8, they decide to take the entire army to take on Ai. And they have a brilliant battle plan where they draw the people out of the city. And then they have hidden troops that come and take the city. And then they surround the military men of Ai, and they destroy them all, chase them down and destroy them all. And then they kill their king, and in a kind of a terrible way, they impale him for the day and in front of the city, but they burn the whole city, and then they take him down too. One of the neat things about all that is the signal that Joshua used for the people who were on the other side of the city to attack the city was a javelin. And as far as I know, this is the first mention we have of a javelin. And it says that he reached forward with his hand with the javelin. So I don't know if he reached forward with his hand, the javelin like this, or if he actually took that javelin and had something on it or whatever and threw the javelin in the air. And then those people were watching, sort of like we send, they shoot, what do they call them? What is that called? They shoot a signal into the air today. I wonder if he threw that javelin in the air, because they were pretty far away. It says he did a javelin or reached forward with that javelin, and they saw it, and then they attacked the city. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of cool that they used a javelin for the signal. So what does Joshua do after this victory? They've just crossed the Jordan. They've just had amazing victory in Jericho, and then a crushing, humiliating defeat in Ai. And then they found the sin in their camp, and they eradicated the sin from their camp, and then had a great victory in Ai, again, rediscovering that the Lord, they need to be on the Lord's side moving forward. Joshua does what he was commanded. Let's look in verse 30. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses. And so Moses had told him this. The Lord had told him through Moses this. On the other side, when you get in there, you're going to build an altar like this. And so he built this altar, and they did plaster around the bottom of it. And then he wrote all the words of the law on the altar. And then after he did that, I love what he does in verse 34. Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word that of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the aliens who lived among them. They didn't have Bibles that they carried around. They only had the one text that Moses had written on. And so Joshua made a copy of that. And then he read that to all the people in their hearing again, where they would remember the commands that the Lord had given them. That brings us to chapter 9. Now, all of the land of Canaan is absolutely scared to death of Joshua, this great ruler, and all the Israelites at this point. And so they get smart about it. And these kings come together, and they unite their armies to come against Israel. Most of them. We read in chapter 9 that, verse 1 and 2 of chapter 9, that several kings came together. But in verse 3, we realize that Gibeon had a different idea. Verse 3, however, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. The men put on worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the men of Israel, we have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us. The people of Canaan knew, word had gotten out, that they were going to destroy all the land of Canaan. They were going to destroy all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. They were going to eradicate them. And so since they knew that, they pretended to be people from far away, where they would make a treaty with them since they were from far away. And when they asked them, why did you come to do that? Look in verse 9. They answered, your servants have come from a very great distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we have heard reports of him and all that he did in Egypt and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites east of Jordan, Sihon king of Heshbon and Og king of Bashan. I'm telling you, Og was something else. Og and Sihon are brought up again about their defeat and how the Israelites defeated them. They must have been something else. And said, so we heard about all of that, and so we wanted to make peace with you. So look in verse 14. This gives us a good thing to remember. Verse 14, the men of Israel sampled their provisions, the moldy bread, the old wine, and the old wineskins, but did not inquire of the Lord. Then Moses made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. They did not inquire of the Lord. Oh my goodness. You know, I'm not going to get on to Joshua and the Israelites about this because I think that this is so us. This is us all the time. We're like, well, this is a small decision. This is a little thing. We can figure this out ourselves. We don't need to bother God with this. This is a small thing. We got clear evidence in front of us. It's obvious which way we should go. Okay, we're going to make the decision. I'm telling you, we do that so often when we don't realize that we need to, again, seek the Lord. We need to be in his face, on our knees, seeking him all the time, asking his direction on these kinds of decisions. And they didn't. They didn't ask the Lord. And so they made a treaty with him and made an oath to them. And the Lord will not allow them to be oath breakers. And so this is a real serious deal. But they get found out. Right after they leave, they find out that they weren't from far away. They were from Gibeon, which was the next city that they were probably going to attack. And they were furious with them. So they came at them and they can't destroy them because they made their oath. So this is what happens in verse 20 and 21 of that chapter. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live so that the wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore to them. They continued, let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers for the entire community. Then we see in verse 27, that day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the community and for the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose. And that is what they are to this day. Woodcutters and water carriers. That's better than being dead, I guess. But already they've got off the path of exactly what God had in store for them, had planned for them. So here we are now in chapter 10. And I told you that the kings were coming together to fight against Israel together. But then they heard the king of Jerusalem heard that what Gibeon had done, and it made them furious. And so the king of Israel went and found the 4 other kings and said, all right, that's 5 of us. We're going to go and we're going to attack Gibeon because they shouldn't have done that. They should have been with us. We're going to wipe them out because apparently Gibeon was a strong city, a fortified city, a city like Jericho. It was one of the ones that they were depending on. And so they were so angry. He said, well, forget about the Israelites for now. Let's go get payback on Gibeon. He should have never done that. And so the 5 kings come together and they're going against Gibeon. And the Gibeonites come running to their new allies. They come to Joshua and go, hey, what, all these kings are coming against us. We're your servants. Hey, don't you want your wood? Don't you need your water? You need to come help us, man. You need to come take care of this. And so Joshua hears about the trouble. of the Gibeonites and the 5 kings coming against them, and this is what happens. Verse 8. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took these 5 kings by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, who defeated them in a great victory at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and this other city, and they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah. The Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hailstones than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. So here's the battle. They march all night long, all through the night. They march. Now they're good at marching because we know they marched 28 miles or so that one day, so they know how to march. But they all get together and they march all through the night. They get to the end of that march. They don't rest. As soon as they get there, they attack. And they surprised these 5 kings. Were not expecting them to do an all-night march. You just didn't do that in those days. And so here they come and they attack. And the Lord gives them the victory and they start fleeing from them. And when they start fleeing from them, the Lord shoots down hailstones from above and kills many of them with hailstones. More of them died from the hailstorm than they died from the sword that day. And then we have one of the greatest miracles in the entire Bible that no one ever really talks about much happens right here. The long day. On verse 12 it says, On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, O sun, stand still over Gibeon, O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. As it is written in the book of Jasher, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There's never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to man. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Incredible miracle here. Joshua prays to the Lord that the sun and the moon would stop and that they would stay where they are in the sky, where they could see and finish the job that God had given them to do because the task was so great. And so the Lord listens to Joshua and miracle of miracles stops everything, the sun and the moon and the earth, so they can finish it. It was a long day, a 48-hour day. It says that they stood in the sky for 24 extra hours, and that was recorded by a different historian as well. And as we've looked into other cultures in history and antiquity, we have also them writing about the extra long day that happened in history. And we know that it was Joshua's prayer that moved the Lord to do this particular miracle. Now, how big was this miracle? Now, to them, it probably didn't even seem like it was near as big a miracle as him parting the Red Sea or the Jordan, which piled up and up in a heap, because that looked enormous to them. To them, it probably just looked like he was stopping the sun in the sky, which to them was just a small ball up in the sky that was being stopped by the Lord to give extra sunlight. But we today know that this miracle is far and beyond that. That this means him stopping the entire cosmos and stopping the earth and stopping the rotation of the earth and the rotation of the moon and the rotation of the sun and the rotation of the earth around the sun, all for 24 hours. That's almost beyond comprehension how big that was. Let me put it to you this way. Let's say that God wanted to stop the rotation of the earth and not anything else. Let's say he just stopped the earth from rotating. Well, that's not just all that happens. If he stopped the earth from rotating, the earth is rotating at over 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. And so we would all be flung as fast as you can that other direction. I mean, we would all be dead. And then the water from the oceans would come up on land. I mean, have you ever spun something and then stopped it? Have you ever shook up a globe or anything and tried to see everything stop at once? The crazy thing is that everything stopped at once with no side effects, that shows the miraculous, incredible, omnipotent power of God. Whew. Prayer of a righteous man accomplishes great things. Now, as we read on in chapter 10, we see that the 5 kings had ran and hid in a cave. Joshua sealed it up until he got the work done, brought them out of the cave, and then executed them in front of the people. But before he executed, he had them say this in Joshua 10:25. He said, "Do not be afraid," talking to the leaders of Israel. "Do not be discouraged. Be strong and courageous." Have we heard that before? "This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you are going to fight. He's going to put them under your heel." And sure enough, they go from here, and you read in the rest of chapter 10 this incredible conquest of all the southern cities. And it says that they had total domination and that no one could stand against them, and they were all wiped out. Seeing the death and destruction caused by the people of Israel and the total wiping out of cities and some cultures in the rest of chapter 10 brings us to one of the great questions about God that people have, and a lot of people talk about when they try to say that they don't believe in a God like the God of the Old Testament, a God who's so vengeful and full of wrath that he would do these things. Basically, they're saying that God ordered genocide to happen in Canaan land, and they can't figure out how a loving God, a merciful, just God, would be able to do that. And so I'm going to tackle this topic here for just a couple of minutes. Richard Dawkins, this militant atheist, had this really long quote about the God of the Old Testament, and that he was arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. He calls it fiction. Jealous, proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, vindictive, for killing homosexuals, racist, infants, children, animals, all about himself, malevolent bully is what he calls him. And I guess you could pull some of the scripture out there and see that when it says to destroy everything that lives in a city. And that's soldiers, but it's also men and women and children and animals. Then if you just pulled that out and looked at it as just that you would have this bully idea about God. But when we're listening to attributes of God, when we're saying that he is a God of love, he is a God of mercy, he's a God of grace, one of the things we always list is he's a God of justice. Well, we probably put that too far down the list, because God really is a God of justice. Here's what I want you to remember from this. God is just, even if we don't understand it. God is just. The God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament. He's the God before the Old Testament. He's the God after the New Testament. He's the God today. He is I am. He is the same now as he was then, as he's going to be for eternity. He's the same God. And he is a God of justice. And what we see happening here to all the people in Canaan is really God bringing judgment to a people, to a nations, using another people. And now God has used several different things to bring judgment before. Do you remember the flood? God used the flood to destroy the whole earth, to judge the earth and the people on it, because their sin was so great. And so he judged them. God has used the Red Sea to judge Egypt and its people, and he used the 10 plagues and the Passover to judge the people of to judge the people of Egypt. He uses miraculous things. He can only be called God to do those things all the time. Well, this time he's chosen to use an army and his people. And he's doing it where all the people will be afraid of the Israelites and have fear of them, but also where the Israelites will continually to choose to be on God's side and have God on their side. That's why he's using them. But it doesn't just stop there. We read further on in the Old Testament that God uses Babylon and the Assyrians and the Persians, real pagans, to judge Israel as well. God uses any element he wants to in his creation for judgment, for miracles, for blessings, for provision. God made it all. God holds it all together. And God uses it all not only for his pleasure, but for his character. And so God is a God of love. He is a God of mercy, but he is a God of justice. And if we study the Bible and not just take these little verses out, we'll come to that the Old Testament is just as much of a love letter of God as the New Testament. And we can see that if you look in Genesis chapter 15, when God was talking to Abraham, he told him exactly what was going to happen. He says, your people are going to go to Egypt for 400 years. And when they come back, judgment will happen on this land that I'm promising you. But not yet, not now, because the sins of the Amorites have not reached their full measure. And so God was planning even then to judge the Amorites and all the people of Canaan if they would not turn to him. Will he relent? Will he change his mind if a people turn to him, if they confess their sins, if they make him their Lord and their God? Absolutely he does. And we see that with Rahab. Rahab made him her Lord. She's the prostitute. Rahab the prostitute. She made him her Lord, and not only did he save her life, but he honored her. She ended up being the grandmother of King David and in the line of Jesus himself. And she's even mentioned in the New Testament because of her faith and because she's in the hereditary line of Jesus. Yes, God turns and will have compassion and pity and mercy and love for those who seek him. Always. But it was time for this judgment to come. And that's another good point. You don't know when your judgment's coming. But here are some of the reasons why I think this happened. I think first, it was a judgment by God on the Amorites and all the people of Canaan, which is what he told Abraham would happen in Genesis 15. He is judging those people. Did they deserve judgment? Yes. These are the same people like Sodom and Gomorrah. They were deeply involved in incest. They were involved in child sacrifice and worship, bestiality, and all these different things. They have defiled themselves and they had ruined their cultures and they had followed these false gods. Now, you say, well, they didn't know. Yeah, they did know. They came off the same boat that Noah came off of. They did know about the Lord. They did have opportunity. And not only that, they knew from their very mouths here. Gibeon talks about how they knew about the God that rescued them from Egypt and had parted the Red Sea and had given them defeat against Og of all people. And they knew that God was leading them. They knew about the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. They knew about the crossing of the Jordan. They had 40 years to confess and repent and turn to this true God. But they did not. They continued in their own pagan and heathen ways. And so God judged them. And he used Israel to do it. And that's hard for us to stomach. But God has to be just and has to judge. And he also has to keep his promises. He had given this land. The first reason was for punishment, a judgment on the people. The second was to protect the people of Israel. God knew how easily swayed they were and how easy it would be to pull them away from him and go to these idols and these other things. That sin is so desirable, and so you're so easily swayed to it because we have wicked hearts. And so he knew that, and so he needed to eradicate those cultures to help preserve their worship to the one true God for their own sake. It was to protect Israel from sinning. And so those are two of the reasons it happened. But when we look at how Joshua writes this, and he says that they were utterly destroyed, that they were annihilated, that everything that breathed was killed. That's not exactly what happened. And so there we get in more into the poetry or into hyperbole that Joshua was using to describe what happened. And I think of it this way. I think of it like my son Danny plays basketball, and if he beats another team in basketball, I mean, Danny would say if they beat him by 10 points that they killed him. Well, they didn't kill him. They beat him by 10 points. Or if they beat them by 50 points, they annihilated them. They totally destroyed them. They humiliated them. Yes, but they really just beat them by 50 points. And so there's a little bit of that kind of hyperbole happening here, because not only did God say destroy them, but right after he said destroy them, he also said, and don't intermarry with them. And so if he follows that with the next sentence, he knows that there's still going to be some around. And I don't want you to intermarry with them and again corrupt your culture. If I were to guess exactly what happened, is when their fortified city came in together and all the people that could get in the city were in the city. When he says that everything that breathed died there, I believe that everyone in that city probably died, and all the animals and all the things in that city was judged, and they burned it, and they did those different things to destroy that city. And he said it was utterly destroyed, and that it was. But when you're coming as an army to that, a lot of people go into the city, but a lot of people go, they scatter, they run for their lives. And all the time that they're going city to city, there are these people who are running for their lives. And so if they didn't stop and fight Joshua, then they ran for their lives and probably did live. And we discover later that they didn't do a good job of eradicating all the people from the land. And we'll talk about that next week. I hope that gives you some answers about the conquest that had to happen for the people to take over the people of Israel to take over the land of Canaan, and maybe some answers about God. You need to look at God as a whole in the whole Bible, and we see, if we read the whole Bible, that he was judging these cultures and these people. He had given them time to turn, and that if they repented, that they could become part of Israel, just like Rahab did, who not only did he forgive, he gave a place of honor. And so that's what's happening here in Joshua. What have we learned today? We have learned that if we are on God's side, then he will give us great victory in our lives like he gave them at Jericho. We learned that if we have sin in the camp, if we have sin in our camp, that God knows about it, and it can utterly destroy us and all those involved with us and around us. And we've learned also that God is a God of justice, and that sin can be judged and could be judged at any minute, at any time. And so today I urge you to take a moment, just like Joshua said, and consecrate yourself. Pray to the Lord and ask him to reveal any sin that may be in you and in your heart, and get on God's side. Don't ask him to be on your side. Get on God's side and seek his will and do it his way. And you will see the great blessings come to you, this God of love and God of justice. Well, that's our time for the day. I hope you enjoyed that lesson in Joshua. Next week we're finishing the book of Joshua. We're going to go to the northern kingdoms. And so that's chapters 11 through 24 in Joshua if you want to read this week. But if you don't have time to read all of that, take the time to read chapters 23 and 24 as we get into Joshua's final address to the people. And we will finish the book of Joshua next week. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. God bless you. I'll see you next week.